All right, so we're going to talk about turns around a point. So the goal of this maneuver is to be able to recognize how wind affects your ground track. Now, one thing that's really important that we're going to want to remember is the faster our ground speed, the steeper our bank's going to be. Do you remember that? Okay, perfect. So we're going to go over this drawing here, and each of these, the ends of each of these lines is a mile. So this is a mile, this is a mile, this is a mile, this is a mile. So we're going to set these turns up basically at a half a mile. So during our setup, we're obviously going to want to clear the area. Are you familiar with how to do that?
Somewhat, yes.
Okay. So we'll clear the area. We're going to want to make sure we're at least 1,000 feet off the ground, but for these purposes, we're going to be 1,500 feet off the ground at least. So around here, it's going to be around 300 or 3,000 MSL. So we're going to set up this maneuver. We've already cleared the area, done all these things. Our airspeed, we're going to go between 90 and 95 miles an hour for these maneuvers. We're going to want to set up on downwind on one of these half-mile sections. Making sense so far? Okay. And if you have any questions, just stop me. So, like I said, we're remembering our faster ground speed is going to equal steeper bank. So when we have a tailwind and we're setting up on downwind like this, I guess I should say, since our circle's right here, we're starting this way. So with that tailwind, our ground speed is going to be the fastest, correct? So in this quadrant here, it's going to be steep to medium bank, because throughout this turn, our bank is constantly changing depending on our ground speed and our wind. Now, one thing I should cover before I go too far into this is the reason that we have a steeper bank with faster ground speed is when we're going faster here and we don't have enough bank in, what's going to happen is instead of keeping this nice tight circle here, we're going to end up drifting way out here, and that's not what we want. So when we keep that appropriate bank in, it's going to keep our ground track where we want it. Now, so going back to what I was saying before, this is going to be our steep to medium turn. So when you cross this reference line here, you're going to want to roll into about 30 degrees of bank, and I just showed you on the attitude indicator where that is. So roll into about 30 degrees of bank or so. That's going to be all you're probably going to need. Now it's going to depend on the day, the winds, everything like that. So roll into a 30 degrees bank. Don't be shy with the roll because you don't want to go super slow, but just be firm with it. Roll into that 30 degrees of bank. So this quadrant here, steep to medium. Now when we get to this point here, it's going to be a crosswind, correct? Now with that wind, for this example, let's say this wind is coming out of the north. Are you familiar with crab angles and how they work?
Well, I kind of know what a crab angle is, but can't say that I'm super familiar with how it works. But.
Okay. So when we're crossing this line right here, let's say our airplane is right here at this point. Can you see that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Our nose is actually going to want to be pointed a little bit this way, because if we keep our nose straight like this and that wind's coming down, what do you think is going to happen?
It'll push you.
Yeah, it's going to push us down, correct? So we want to have a little bit of a crab angle here crossing this line, so we don't want to be completely straight crossing it. Good? So again, starting with steep to medium, you said the start of the turn is going to be your steepest turn, and as you get to this point, you're going to roll it out to more of a medium bank. And now this quadrant over here is going to be your medium to shallow. Because as we continue this turn around here, what's happening to our ground speed?
It's going slower.
Slower, right. So that means that our bank's going to be decreasing, correct? So this quadrant here, medium to shallow. Now when you cross this line here, our wind's directly ahead of us, correct? So we can cross this line here, wings level, because our wind's coming directly from the north. Now, when we get out to the airplane, obviously winds are going to be different. They're not always perfectly out of the north. But for demonstration purposes today, that's what we're going to use. Now, so this quadrant's good. Now we've crossed this line. I guess, let me rephrase that. I shouldn't say wings level because this is always a constant turn, but
I was just going to say, I don't
I made a mistake.
We had
there.
very little winds, and I think he told me we should be constantly in some sort of turn.
Bank.
Yeah, some sort.
Yes.
Sorry.
No, you're good. Yeah, that was my mistake. So this quadrant here So we went steep to medium, medium to shallow. Now what do you think is going to be next?
Give a second. Steep to medium,
Steep to medium,
medium
to shallow.
Shallow to medium.
Perfect. All right. Because here our ground speed's going to be slower, so we want a shallow to medium bank. Now again, we're going to cross this line here, and we want to keep this crab angle in mind still. So we don't want to be pointed perfectly straight, because then we're going to get pushed in closer, which is going to make the rest of the maneuver even harder. So shallow to medium, and then to end it, we're going to go back to medium to steep, because as we continue this turn, our ground speed is going to start to increase and our bank angle is going to want to increase. So, do you have any questions? Literally anything.
Now that you mentioned that, if he told me and I missed it, so I don't want to say that he didn't tell me, but I don't remember him saying. I think the bank angle he was telling me had to do with the wind you were dealing with. I don't remember him talking about ground speed. If he did, I just missed it, and I probably
It kind of goes hand in hand.
Okay.
Because yes, obviously our wind speeds are going to affect our ground speeds and the direction the wind's coming from. So like I said before, with that tailwind, that direct tailwind, when we enter this, it's going to be our fastest ground speed, which means we want to have the steepest angle of bank. And as we continue this turn, our bank is constantly, it's going to be shallower. It's going to get shallower and shallower through this first 180 degrees, and then it's going to start shallow here and slowly go from shallow to medium, medium to steep.
So we were doing, as we were going through this, and as we were with the tailwind, we had to add a little bit of power, because obviously with the tailwind, you got to keep, see what I'm saying? You have to keep wind coming at you. If you got a tailwind, you know what I'm saying, and you don't keep your speed up, then you're obviously going to lose lift, right? So you got to keep your speed up a little bit. So
and that
changes a lot, I don't think.
Yeah, and that's true for any turn, honestly. When you make any sort of turn like that, adding a little bit of power, not going to hurt anything. Maybe 50 to 100 RPM if you want to, just to help you maintain that altitude. So that's clear then? Does that make sense to you?
It's making more sense. I wouldn't say I got it 100%.
Gotcha. Yeah, and it's something, like you said, you practiced it today. Was that today? Or?
Yeah, it was this morning.
Okay. Was there anything on there that you just weren't getting, or?
Well, like I told you earlier when we were talking, part of my thing is trying to figure out that sight picture and being able to hold my altitude without constantly looking at my altimeter. So that's part of what I have to learn, is being able to hold my altitude better, because I felt like he was constantly saying, okay, you're climbing, okay, now you're descending, now you're climbing, now you're descending, and I got to learn to hold that more steady without. And it was
because you know how I said your attitude indicator is your most proactive instrument and it reacts instantly. Same thing with your windscreen. If you can get that sight picture in your windscreen ingrained into your head, then you automatically know, oh crap, nose is dropping, fix it, get it right back to where it is, and then you don't have to keep checking that. Because are you familiar with the 50-10 rule? You talked about that?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. So for every minute you're in the airplane, 50 seconds outside, 10 seconds inside.
And not necessarily 10 consecutive seconds.
Correct. Perfect. That is another objective of this, is to be able to really work on that while maintaining a constant distance from your intersection. I would assume out in this area you're using roads to do these.
That's what we did. We used
it's a perfect area to do
intersection.
I was going to say something else too. But that's one way you can tell if your banks are proper, is if you notice, like I said, for example, down here, if you're starting to drift farther away, then you know your bank angle's not steep enough. And in these areas right here, your crab angle, again, crab angle is going to be pointed that way a little bit. That's a bad drawing, but if if your crab angle, instead of being level like
So
this,
on
your
the
crab
upwind side, you almost need to be, I'm not probably using the right terminology, but when you're going into the wind, you almost want to be not overshooting it, I'm saying, but you're pointing your nose, 'cause what he said, you need to point your nose.
Yeah.
You don't want your nose
So-
pointed right at your point, I think is what he
Yes.
said. So,
Yes. And actually,
you know,
so to build on that, actually, when you start this first turn, you're going to want to, like you said earlier, when you said overshoot and undershoot, you do want to overshoot this turn a little bit as far as the heading your nose is pointed, because the wind's coming from this way and you want that nose pointed that way, you're going to have to turn more than 90 degrees to get that crab angle in. Now the opposite is true. Once you come around here, you're going to want to turn less than 90 degrees because you want that nose pointed towards the wind a little bit. Does that make sense?
I thought we did the opposite. I thought on that one because if we were coming up this way, the wind was going to be trying to hold us down, so you almost needed to keep your nose pointed a little higher.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
That
Yeah.
what you're saying? Okay,
Yeah,
okay,
gotcha.
I just making
Sorry.
sure I was following you.
No, you're good. Yeah. Is there anything else that wasn't clear? And again, this is just a visual model with perfect scenario. Obviously, our wind's never going to be out of the north. We're going to have a bunch of other things happening. But as far as technicality, is that making sense to you?
I believe so.
Okay, perfect.
No, I just got to figure out how to